Well, good afternoon, everybody, or whenever you happen to run into this truth bomb riff discussion with my colleague and somebody I just growing to appreciate more every day. A gentleman by the name of Kevin Howard out of the Great Northwest. I'm Patrick Lovell. I am the producer of The Con at www.thecon.tv. And together with other colleagues, we're trying to manifest the impossible to create a clean new deal. Now, this is kind of an interesting opportunity for a dialogue because like all of us out there, nobody really, given all of the complexities of all of the different, shall we say, emotional touchstones that are happening in society today, can compartmentalize in a way that everybody has to be on the same page about every issue. And in fact, I don't know at a time in my life, even before technology, that I had to be completely on the same page as everyone that was in my sort of universe for me to actually get along with them. In fact, to the contrary, most of my best friends I had wild disagreements with, but we had a mutual respect for one another. And I don't know, you know, how that cuts through to the broader populace. But Kevin and I don't see completely eye to eye on everything, but that's okay because we see very parallel to what the end game is and what the core of the problems are. But on that note, I dropped a truth bomb riff yesterday that Kevin sent me a very nice and thoughtful email about. It's not in our best interest and it's not in my best interest to actually have it in the public domain. And I'm going to thank you, Kevin, because I really didn't expect anybody to watch the entire thing, to be honest with you. And here you are watching the entire thing. And as I mentioned in this truth bomb, and it's my last truth bomb, there's a picture of Travis Kelce and uh, and Taylor Swift, and I used it as a bit of clickbait, where it was like, I hope that Travis Kelce proposes to Taylor Swift after winning the Super Bowl. What a happy ending! And then I'm like, this is the case for the Clean New Deal because I'm using it as clickbait to see where everybody is, to see if I can get them in the dialogue. But what I introduced in that conversation was first, my truth bomb riffs before you and I became colleagues in this whole thing, and it was the whole purpose to connect with people like you. Was it's part sermon, it's part lecture, and ultimately, in some ways, I have to be honest, it's part therapy because I have to get this information that I have out, but I'm trying to compartmentalize it in a way that I connect with where people are in the dialogue in this never-ending echo chamber, insane amount of information that comes at us that is literally insane information, one way or the other, especially what we're about to discuss. But I decided, look, I'm going to go for it, and I just went off on this stream of consciousness because I'm trying desperately in the context of what happened on Friday with President Biden sending B 2 bombers into the theater that might increase into a more regional situation, which has a lot of important scenarios, especially from your background, Kevin, particularly. And I can't wait to see what you have to say about it. But I was using that to paint the picture, first and foremost, that if we're going to have the audacity, particularly from the White House, to say that American lives matter and to kind of send this sort of message that we're this cohesive group and that the White House is going to look out for its troops and everything else, as a cynical, jaded guy who's lived in reality since 9/11, the world would look a lot different if that were actually true, particularly as it related to the great economic meltdown crisis of 2008, where, as I've mentioned in many of our truth bombs in our discussions and everywhere else. I mean, just the numbers themselves. There were literally at least 10 million houses that were foreclosed upon, and if you understand our work, you'll understand they were foreclosed upon illegally. That created devastation with the nuclear families. That led to collateral damage. That led to divorces and children in all sorts of harm's way, and then ultimately in many suicides. And then what we see all over the United States that's connected to it, homelessness like crazy, where a lot of people didn't rebound and they went down, the deep end. And when you wind up the streets, game over until somebody gives you a helping hand. And the whole cacophony of that, when you understand the cause and effect, I frame as financial terrorism. And so what I was trying to do, and I rewatched about half of it this morning, and I could see that if you stuck all the way through, I'm sure there was things I made some mistakes on, but mechanically, I was delivering what I wanted to deliver. But you had some criticism, and you thought it wasn't in our best interest to do so. And so, what I'd like to do is ask for your sign of your framing, what bothered you, and to discuss it and to see how that formulates in context to where, we're trying to go as a people. Because again, to reiterate the point, not all of us are going to see eye to eye on everything. In fact, again, it's an impossibility, and nor do we want to be. I think we heard this in terms of Bernie. He had like a what is the word? Like the standard of like a perfect standard. And everybody was kind of cynical towards that. We can't have the perfect standard towards one. We've got to deal with the reality of what we're dealing with. So anyway, on that note, I think I made my point. Kevin, why don't you lead us into it, starting with what you think is important to discuss or criticize, and get your sort of really opinion on the record about how this whole thing fits. And, because I think a lot of people are, especially if millions of people saw this downstream, how do you think that would ultimately play?
Yeah, and I really appreciate us having this opportunity to talk. And I want to say to anyone who would be watching this video, this truth bomb, this is a measure of the true integrity of Patrick Lovell, that he would want to have this conversation and potentially release it. So if you're watching it, that this, bravo to you, Patrick, because certainly my email was intended to tug on your coat outside of the public view, right? Because I consider myself an ally and a friend.
Thank
So
you, Kevin. That means the world to me, by the way, that you said that.
absolutely. So when I saw that you dropped a nearly 2 hour truth ball, I'm serious. You would really. It's like you get the popcorn. You get the popcorn. You get your notepad out pen, literally, and I'm taking notes because every truth bomb, Patrick, you teach me, man. I mean, the reason why I know what I know because I it's a constant absorbing of information from people who actually know. So when you have people who have a source of who have credibility and sources of information, you want to get down to wisdom. You want to get down to data. Okay, so I'm sitting here and you are just blowing. I mean, you're just going and you're dropping some phraseology that I just love, like the Borg of Turney, the tools of the fool's circus. I mean, great stuff, right? And so this is the detail I'm going with, as I'm going, I'm listening to you. And then I saw, and again, you're talking about a variety of issues. You always weave it in. Because you know so much information that you are that it lends itself to digression, but you find a way to weave your way back to it. Okay, what I'm about to say is within the context of this. You are the man who has put together, because you've dedicated over 13 years of your life and millions of dollars of money, the cause of the systemic corruption that's destroying so many lives in America and around the world. So, with the man with the plan, the man with the information, my comments come because we have to, in order for people to believe you, your credibility has to be bulletproof, right? Now, we're all human. And I think it's an unfair standard to say if someone happens to make a mistake over here, that means that what they say over, their primary work is invalidated. But we live in that world. That's exactly how critics destroy people. Is they take anything that you have done anywhere, anyhow, and if they can show that there's some fallacy or some mistake or some error or whatever, they use that to undermine the actual material information you have. The information you have revealed in the con and the new untouchables is too important in the lives of people to have people to be able to dismiss it for stuff that really doesn't. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. It's just not as important. So this is the framing of why I wrote the email I sent you. So you were riffing and you talked about a variety of issues, and there were some factual errors in what you were saying. And so I will give you one example because we were trying to do this in a tight time frame. It was you were talking about 9/11, and you were referencing Saudi Arabia's complicity in 9/11. Now, as a matter of fact, absolutely, we know that all the hijackers from Saudi Arabia, right? Okay, we know that this was done by Al Qaeda, led by
Or 15 out of the 19.
yeah, yeah, well, 15 out of 19, right? right, from Saudi Arabia, and that certainly Al Qaeda is led by Bin Laden, Osama bin Laden, who is a Saudi, right? And you basically said, as you were just rolling through, suggested that the Saudi government, the country of Saudi Arabia, which is essentially the Saudi royal family, right, was complicit in 9/11, right? And the reason why that's a factual error, that's verifiable factual error, is because Osama bin Laden, we know who Osama bin Laden is. He released a fatwa in 1996, his holy war against the United States and America's allies, right, was because, well, we have to go back to the first Gulf War. Okay, so and we have
Which
to
you were a
understand.
part of, which you
But
were a part. Let's
yeah,
point that out.
absolutely,
You were
that's
there.
true. But I don't want to digress because we have a tight time frame. So when Saddam Hussein, as the leader of Iraq, decided to claim Kuwait, take Kuwait, attack Kuwait, and absorb Kuwait into Iraq, the concern around the world was that he would continue on the Arabian Peninsula and attack Saudi Arabia, right? At that time, in 1991, Osama bin Laden offered to gather the Mujahideen. He offered to the Saudi royal family, he's a Saudi, to gather the Mujahideen, who was used to successfully repel Russia in Afghanistan in, 7 years earlier, right? Okay, to come to Saudi Arabia and repel Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. George H.W. Bush made a deal with the Saudi royal family to say that instead of the Mujahideen doing this, that the United States would do it, would lead the way. The Saudi royal family chose to take America's deal. But and we did, and we went in and we knocked Saddam Hussein out. The price for that deal was that the Saudi royal family gave the United States the right to set up permanent military bases in Saudi Arabia, the home of Mecca, the holy of the holies in the Islamic world. Okay, all right. And so literally, I was in NATO. The entire NATO force was the armor, the M2 Abrams, all of that was moved into Saudi Arabia as a staging ground to repel Iraq out of Kuwait and stuff like that. And we left them there. We created permanent military bases in Saudi Arabia, and they are still there. Okay, so fast forward to 1996. What Bin Laden was said in his fatwa is that, and it was against America and our allies because we, as non-Muslims, were defending the holy of the holies. We were in Saudi Arabia, and that the Saudi royal family invited us to do it. So, so it was the United States and her allies. The key ally was the Saudi royal family who invited us in the first place. So this is why on 9/11, right, when all aircraft and air flights were shut down in America, and the only people who were allowed to fly were emissaries of the Saudi royal family, including the Bin Ladens who were in the country, right? Right. It was because they were actually our allies. The Bin Laden family is a multi-billion-dollar construction magnate in Saudi Arabia. Okay, so they were part of the establishment in Saudi Arabia. It was Bin Laden who was the variable. He was the outcast, not outcast, but he was the one on the edge, and this was a conflict. So he waged holy war against the Saudi royal family and America. And so this is what I'm saying when I say that the idea that Saudi Arabia was complicit in 9/11, as if the attack on us was that no, there was other terrorist activity that occurred in Saudi Arabia leading up to 9/11, in the same way that our Navy ship was attacked in previous, and that type of thing. So this is an example, and I was trying to say that, okay, there's facts that can definitely, however you want to interpret facts, there are facts, right, that are easily verifiable, that explain that that the Saudi royal family is not likely to have been involved in the attack on America in 9/11, because they too were this target of the fatwa that bin Laden had issued out, in 96 against America and her allies, and Saudi Arabia was the key ally involved. That's okay. So I did taking that information that could easily be used and would absolutely be used to try to throw shade on your credibility, right? When and that's all I'm saying. Everyone can't know everything about everything. You're not claiming to know everything about everything. You
Can I
absolutely
insert something here real quick?
right. Yes,
Is it okay? Or
of
okay.
course. No, go ahead.
So first of all, again, when I have an eye-opening experience with you, Kevin, because I learned so much from you. Okay, first of all, thank you for that, and I love the fact that you were there, right? But I was very aware of all of that. I didn't go into that in the truth bomb because a couple of things you should be aware of. First and foremost, I have been interacting for years with the 9/11 families. So I've seen all of the material that the 9/11 families have shared with me that's
Mm,
been working its way through Congress and all of these other things post
yeah,
9/11. And then, of course, all of
yeah.
the things that involved with Senator Bob Graham's involvement with the 9/11 families and so on and so forth. What
I
I,
know this too. Yep, you're
right.
right.
And what I presented in my truth bomb, and again, it was the purpose of it mostly and boy do I hear where you're coming from. Okay, but this is where things get really, really slippery, right? Because what we know in that information that I mentioned that is also factually accurate, that the FBI knew where the cells were, the CIA knew where the cells were. We know that there was, prior to Homeland Security, there was, of course, every time we got on planes with our passports, there were databases that we could track, that the government prior, actually, at the beginning of the Bush administration, let's think about this. The Bush administration came in 1998, correct? Is that when W1,
No, no. The Bush they came
2000?
in yeah, 2000. Yes,
It was
exactly.
2000. It was
Yeah,
2000.
January 21. Oh,
because
January
because
20th.
because there were, because this came
2000.
to Clark, and I can't think of his. I was saying Wesley Clark. That was a mistake.
Yes.
It was the other Clark that was inside. That they had revealed later that we had known that there was a lot of Saudis that were being reported that were allowed to stay in the country that were questionable first and foremost. The FBI knew where they were, particularly in Los Angeles and San Diego, and they also knew, and so did the CIA, and they also knew. Well, the CIA knew where they were training. Apparently we all knew it was a lack of imagination, as it was called downstream, and that the agencies weren't talking to each other, which was true. But why weren't they talking to each other? Well, because a lot of this information was being spread through the agencies, but they apparently had gone up the food chain to Cheney and Rice, and they weren't being bridged, and so the agencies weren't speaking to each other. And again, we knew from those cells where they were getting material support from, which turned out to be the wife of Bendar Ben Sultan, which was, of course, the guy who was one of the largest shareholders of Fox. He was one of the most prominent Saudis in the late 90s. You remember him being all over American television. He was constantly at what was the Crawford, Texas, where the Bush, Texas White House was. He was constantly there. And, by all, if the interpretation of the time, he was one of us. Now, let's just think briefly that if you, the entire methodology of the relationship with Saudi, from what I understand, and I don't have all the details of this, so this is a lot of inference, but not only do they trade in dollars, then we know they're the swing producer, and basically their influence through OPEC made a lot of difference, particularly during first Bush administration and then Clinton's, because you remember when we had all of the, Humvees, and we lowered gas prices, and all of those types of things were tied to it back in that time period, mid 90s forward. But a lot of that revenue was agreed to from the very beginning to be reinvested in the United States. That's why we see the Saudi sovereign wealth fund pretty much everywhere. And we have seen, since, quite frankly, over the last 20 years, they've been literally everywhere, particularly
Hmm.
right before the largest IPO in the history of the world, which is Saudi Aramco, which is run through what? All of the major players on Wall Street, right? And they
Right.
also now own a lot of media companies, which is very disconcerting. But to your point about, and this is the last piece of the puzzle on this one that I want to bring to your attention. So I made a documentary prior to making the con, where I went to Washington, D.C. And this is going to sound like it's going to blow my credibility at first, but bear with me before I tell you. Okay. So the financier for my film is from one of the richest families in the United States. And they happened to fund initially a think tank in Washington, D.C. called Defense of Democracies. This was a pro-Israeli lobby. This was a um, you know, uh, well, it was a pro-Israeli lobby within the Beltway on K Street, and they had been forever kind of like, the way I interpret it, going back to the 70s, is almost like a Radio Free Europe sort of scenario. You remember Radio Free Europe and how
Yeah.
it used to operate? It was kind of
Yeah.
like this is what we do in America. These are how things go, and this
Yeah.
that's kind of what they were broadcasting as one part of their sort of division. Not to mention to be a think tank and an initiative. And by the way, a lot of information transparently to, of course, none other than APAC, right? So this operation. Now, at the time, I had thought that this was, the way I interpreted Israel at the time, which was the only democracy in the Middle East. I thought that, through all of the different things, and I've said this in my truth bombs, and I've been transparent with you, right? That I believe Israel has to exist, even though I acknowledge the atrocities that are compartmentalized and a part of everything we've seen with the genocide with Hamas and everything that we just saw with ICIJ. And that was a big mistake I made in my truth bomb. I didn't know what the abbreviation of ICJ stood for. What does it stand for?
International Court of Justice.
There you
So
go.
you were
I
close
said,
with
I said,
jurisprudence.
I,
Yeah,
I
you
was
said
like, I
jurisprudence.
did say International Court of I wasn't that far off.
No, you weren't that far off.
I thought about it and I was like, why don't I know this name? But anyway, so, we could discuss that all day long, but I want to get back to your other criticisms, but I want to finish this point. So it's one of the wildest things I've ever experienced. And you got to believe this in my mind. So I'm doing a lot of interviews on the fly in Washington. I'm trying to get a lot of things going on. And when you're doing a documentary and you're in a budget and you're on a timeline, you can't really figure out a lot of things in advance and do all the due diligence you'd probably like to. You got to try to take some chances sometimes. But I always thought that the Defense of Democracies was, had just an incredibly impeccable reputation. Now, unbeknownst to me, by this time period, it turns out Sheldon Adelson was flowing a ton of money into the Defense of Democracies. And again, it was all smoke and mirrors. I had no idea. And so these guys know that I'm coming because I mentioned, the guy who's my partner and their involvement with the Defense of Democracies. And they're like, oh, yeah, we got a guy that we're going to have you do an interview with. And I meet this guy, and he's this Eastern European kind of heavyweight. I mean, he's an intimidating looking guy. He's got kind of this round face and he's got this thick accent. And I don't know what Eastern Bloc country he comes from. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he was a very impressive individual, very incredibly detailed about certain things. And I asked him the question about Saudi. And what he unraveled was he goes into all this detail about how right at the time of the Iranian hostage crisis, we all were in the midst of that back when we were growing up in the 70s. I mean, that, prior to
79, yep.
the election of Reagan, I mean, that took over everything, not to mention the down chopper, prior to, which laid all the stuff up. And we know what all came behind of it, guns for, hostages and all sorts of weird trickery and all sorts of things that were going on that we learned about Contragate years later. But he talks about the raid of the Wahhabis of Mecca to hold the House of Saud hostage. They took over Mecca. They were creating a insurrection against the families, the House of Saud, and they basically, at that point, after I don't know how many people got killed, but it was a big time situation. You can imagine. Imagine that today if some sort of Wahhabi force took over Mecca in Saudi, what that might look like today, given social media and everything else. It'd be all over the place. But if you may recall, we never saw that, in our media because we were talking about the Iranian Revolution, in the Ayatollah Khomeini and everything else and our hostages. I didn't know about this raid, and I verified it and I did everything else. And he tells me from that point forward, the relationship with the Wahhabis of that House of Saud was to export Wahhabism, but not have it breed at home. That was kind of the play, right? Which leads to what the CIA ultimately gets involved with Al Qaeda, and why Bin Laden learns all of our tricks in Afghanistan and it comes home to roost. Okay, I mean that's all part and parcel. That's baked into this stuff. And you could debate me or tell me I'm wrong, or show me some points, and I'm sure I'd learn plenty. But this is what I've learned so far. And ultimately, I'm not saying that the entire family of the House of Saud were embedded in the actual detailed mechanics of 9/11. I'm not inferring that at all. So I think, if anything, and this is just complete theorizing on my part, giving a lot of the information that I got, throughout this whole course, including the 9/11 families and what the CIA knew and FBI knew and what the 22 redacted pages and everything else were, that there was, we know a lot of what do they used to call all of the people in the Saudi royals were providing charities. You remember the charities to certain
Yeah.
groups, including a lot of the Wahhabis that were part of
Mhm.
what we found if you did the money chain and the forensic evidence and all of the rest of it, that would lead into Al Qaeda. And so at the end of the day, my theory, and nobody knows this, and this is part and parcel to what the problem is, okay, and how it plays into what we're in the midst of with all of the conspiracy theories and the chaos in the United States and the continuation of perpetuation of war in the Middle East and all of the rest of it, not to mention what I talked about, the global reserve currency of the dollar being tied to the commoditization of oil, particularly Saudi as the swing producer. All of that stuff is me piecing pieces of the puzzle together that I have had a front row seat to. And what I'm trying to get the American people to understand is that, look, we didn't answer these questions of 9/11. Senator Bob Graham, who was the head of the 9/11 Commission, said we didn't get it right, and all of those things that lead to the 9/11 families. And that's been ongoing forever. So if we need, a summation of whether or not I think the Saudi royals hatched 9/11, I never said that, nor do I think that. I think, if anything, like you said, the Saudi royals were playing a game of roulette when they let us put our military bases. Don't forget, not only do we have military bases, think about how many employees that the sum total of the oil industry in Saudi Arabia, that includes the engineers, the drillers,
Sure.
all of the distribution, everything else, that are American. I grew up in Texas. Half of Texas is in Saudi Arabia. Okay, it's not just the military; it's the actual infrastructure of the what's it called? I just said it at the outset, Saudi Aramco, right? So yes, we are embedded and immersed with Saudi Arabia in our oil industry because of all of the things that we talked about. And if I had a theory about 9/11 and the Saudi royal family, I don't want to say it because it hurts to say it. But when you look at that, if, for example, Dick Cheney, and we all know he's Halliburton, we all know he had like a front row seat, and we all know that he basically puppeteered George W., Susan Rice, and all of the geniuses that were the military industrial complex. Knowing what I know about the 2008 great financial crisis, Kevin, that if you don't have the left hand talking to the right hand, you can create a lot of chaos. That's what we have in the 2008 great financial crisis, when all the whistleblowers are trying to tell their supervisors, and they're trying to tell the SEC, and they're trying to tell the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and they're trying to tell the FBI. And that's what we pieced together in the con, where the FBI says, look, we had all this information. But then what turned out in our story? During the George Bush administration, given everything we're talking about with Saudi and oil and the military industrial complex and everything else, what we find is that former AG and Gonzalez, I'll just say his last name, for George W. Bush. This is after we had the whole, what is it called, the Patriot Act and everything else under the previous AG. The second AG was Gonzalez. They had shifted away white collar resources at the FBI and the DOJ to go find terrorism, and all of the best minds within the government, they all went to go supposedly do all the stuff that would lead to zero dark 30 and yada yada yada. And meanwhile, we replaced this pursuit of international terrorism, is my point, and we replaced it with domestic terrorism on a monumental scale that destroyed the United States. Again, what set me off was Joe Biden saying, we protect Americans. Well, we have tens of Americans, and then I'll finish it up with this. So it's all a facade. And so my journey down that path is like, don't take the bait, know the history. And I may have gotten some of it wrong, but I think I'm pretty close on a lot of it. And anyway, to your point, I was like, Jesus, I mean, that's the pathway that I had to go through to understand this shit. It's just like they run the show, and it is a compartmentalization of the military industrial, the fossil fuel, the financial apparatus, the dollar reserve currency, which makes what we're trying to reveal possible. So thanks for
No, I hear
making
you. I
that
hear you,
point.
Patrick. And I wasn't trying to get into a debate over how we interpret the facts. What I was trying to say is there are facts that the 9/11 Commission is a part of the narrative that America has painted. There's a reason why the surviving families sued Saudi Arabia, right? That's because that's a part of the narrative that we painted with the 9/11 Commission. But the data and the facts are that Saudi Arabia was a part of the fatwa because they were an ally and it was over U.S. bases, and we knew this. If the 9/11 families knew that the Clinton administration knew why Bin Laden was attacking us, it instead of what Bush said, they hate us for our freedoms, right? I mean, okay, what I'm saying here is that data, those facts are known. The BBC produced a documentary called Why We Fight that expressed this stuff. Uh, Obama's longtime reverend who married him and Michelle, he got into trouble. We castigated him for saying "goddamn America," because the chickens had come to roost at 9/11. But he was right. He was telling the truth. That is not what America understands. We do not view 9/11 as a blowback on US foreign policy because the narrative persists. And what I'm saying to you is the fact those same people who benefited from obscuring why we were attacked on 9/11, those in power, right, are absolutely able to expose if you're going to base as fact, because again, you're the man who knows the facts on as it relates to the con and everything else, right? They will expose the truth because it's out there and it's been exposed by other sources to undermine your credibility. So we can't cite the narrative creators, the 9/11 Commission, which induced the families to go sue Saudi, right? Go down that false path. Right. Because if families understood what we knew, what even the BBC and the CBC produced in the documentary, years ago, right?
Okay, but
They
what,
would.
I don't understand the disconnect here, because I acknowledged everything that you had laid out, and I don't debate any of it. Everything you just said, okay, blowback.
Oh
That's
no,
all. But hold on a second. I'm really interested about this narrative. If I just heard you correctly,
yeah.
I think what you're telling me, the way I'm supposed to interpret this is uh, that forget that we knew where the cells were. Forget that we knew who was funding them. Forget that we knew that
No,
Cheney.
don't forget any.
Well, wait,
Don't
let me
forget
just
any
finish
of
this
it.
point, though. We're not debating because I want to learn from you, but I do think this is an important causality of this whole thing. Because, look, you remember when the neoliberal sort of, what was that thing that, I mean, first of all, we knew there was all sorts of models prior to 9/11 where the CIA had revealed that there were, you know, there were workarounds, or whatever you would call the actual research to think of threat levels and how you deal with it. That, oh yeah, terrorists flying our airlines into buildings was something that we had talked about for some time. inside the circles of this
Oh yeah, that was the report given in August of
right,
2001. Yeah,
right, right.
that, that,
So that's been a long, that was around for a long time. And then the other side of it is, as I recall, and my colleague Eric pointed this out to me while we were on the road making our first film, that the neocons had stated a paper, and I can't remember, I used to know what this was, but where they were like, it was going to take some extravagant, attack on the United States to justify an all-out military campaign in the Middle East. That this was kind of drawn up. It was. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you,
yeah, no, I do know what you're talking about, and this is an interesting strand. But see, I just want to, because I know we only have this 45-minute period, Patrick.
I'm
The
gonna let you
point
finish
of
and make your point because I think
yeah,
we should continue this downstream
yeah,
because it's so, okay. But I do. But you gotta in your answer tell me why what I am saying would because it's all public and it's all been out there for a long time and not everybody's asking these questions because it's not ever been a part of the mainstream. I'm not saying the Saudis designed and created this. I'm saying it was blowback and all the relationship and everything else. But there were ways this whole mechanized situation worked where the people in our military industrial oil complex would benefit from 20 years of what happened. So that's really my
yeah.
point.
All I'm saying here is again, these are complex subjects. Bin Laden is Saudi elite, right? This is like, okay, so there is all types. This is like Saudi elite having a conflict, right? But a part of that Saudi elite is Saudi Arabia, the government of Saudi Arabia, and part of it is civilian, right? And there are families, there's marriages, so yeah, there is okay, right? The part that has been that Osama bin Laden, right? And this is what I'm saying. We know had waged war against the other part of the family, along with us. Okay. And what all I'm saying here is the idea that to not have a really bright red line, to smudge the line and suggest in any way, go back to what you said, right? That the official Saudi, the government, the family of Saud who is controlling things, right? Right. Who authorized, who agreed, who invited us to put permanent bases in Saudi Arabia, that they could be involved. This is what you were saying when you said right. Okay,
Remember,
this
go
is what
back to
I'm
what I said
saying.
about the Wahhabi relationship.
Yeah,
That's what this whole thing was born.
I understand. I understand. This one, okay, is there is an actual line drawn by bin Laden himself. He wrote it in 96. He expanded on it in 98. He made, so that's what I'm saying. Is factually simply untrue. And if, okay, how about this? Proof of the pudding. Has anyone ever vindicated Reverend Wright for his sermon condemning the
So I'm a
American
little lost
government?
on that. How, okay, so walk me through that because I
Oh
remember that
yes.
when that
Do
happened.
you remember when
Yes,
Obama was going to be the nominee, and he had to distance himself from his own minister that he went to that church for 20 years.
right,
He was baptized by Reverend Wright. He
right.
was he was married. Him and Michelle were married by Reverend Wright, and he had to distance himself from Reverend Wright. Why? Because Reverend Wright, in response to 9/11, gave do what the in the great tradition of Black ministers, gave I mean, just you talk about a truth bomb. He said in the wake of 9/11, he blamed the US government. He said, God damn America for what happened here. This is the results of US foreign policy. The chickens have come to roost, and that we're not telling the American public the truth, right? And guess what? That truth is still not known. The 9/11 Commission
That's
did
my
not
whole
expose.
point, though, Kevin. That's my
No,
whole point.
no. The point is no. The total point is that Bin Laden was attacking us because of our base. He had gave other reasons also, but the linchpin that caused him to issue the fatwa was our U.S. bases and that the
I'm not
idea.
arguing that, but why were our
No, but
bases there? Why were our bases there?
no, no,
Let's
no,
think
no,
about
no.
the
Then
military,
it doesn't have
industrial,
to get any more
financial, fuel
complex than
connection.
that.
That's the point.
No, it doesn't get more complex than that. The fact is that bin Laden was waging war on us and the Saudi royal family, the other Arab, the Saudi elite. And I mean, part of the Saudi elite. And yes,
Hold
the
on a
fact that they're
second.
both elite in
Please,
society.
please, please. Let me just say this. Again, I'm not disagreeing with everything, but you're not hearing me. Why is the United States military there?
Okay, I'm done. Because I can tell you this much, my friend, that is not going to matter.
That the fact that the oil and
What?
everything else that we are
No,
trying to extract that bases on the dollar, that
this
has
is not.
nothing to do with
No,
it?
no, no. This is not about Kevin Howard being right and Patrick Lovell being wrong.
I just want to learn from you what your point is. I'm just
No, no.
asking you straight.
My point is you can't afford to be wrong on the facts. You could afford to be wrong on your editorial, how you would interpret the facts, right? But it's factually untrue to suggest that the Saudi the Saudi the official Saudi government, the part of the Saudi royal family that runs the government, right, was participant in 9/11 as an active, as a, like they wanted to make that happen. No, they were a part of who was getting attacked leading up to 9/11
I
and
just told
continue.
you they had evidence of Bendar bin Sultan's wife providing
Or,
material support. Do you deny
no,
that? Do you
no,
not know
no,
that's
no,
reality?
no, I do not deny that.
Okay,
What I
okay,
am
that's
saying to
cool. That's
no,
cool.
no, no. What I'm saying to you
Because it
is
doesn't matter. You're saying that doesn't matter.
no. What I'm saying here, no, I'm not saying that it doesn't matter. You want see you're trying to
I'm
still
trying to
trying to drive.
interpret.
You're trying to drive your point.
No, I'm
It's
not.
not
I'm
that it
trying to
does.
interpret.
Osama bin Laden is part of that Saudi elite. There
Yes.
is going to be all types of gray line relationships
Okay.
in the same way there is in the United States, right?
Absolutely.
In the same way, the
Absolutely.
same way Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton are at his wedding. Okay,
Sure.
amongst the elites, there's all types of gray lines. It doesn't prove shit. It doesn't prove that bin Laden did not issue a fatwa or holy war against the Saudi royal family. That's what I'm saying. The fact that
Never
someone's
said he
wife
didn't.
did something, well, then you cannot. What you're saying is that the Saudi royal family was complicit in 9/11, and that's not true. That's factually not true.
Okay, is Bendar bin Sultan not a member of the Saudi royal
No,
family?
no, no, no. But is the
Is
evidence?
he not?
Wait, hold on. Again,
We
let
have
me.
the evidence.
You talk about his. You said his.
His
Did you just
wife.
say? That's right. Thank you. You said his wife.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. How much power? This is say how much power does women have in Saudi Arabia?
Zero.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you. So we didn't say him. You said his wife. And what I'm saying to you here is, you don't think Osama bin Laden has relationship? I mean, he's a part of the elite. His family is a part of
I
the
look
elite.
forward to talking more
We
about
okay.
this. Look, because this is, I think we need to do a
Why?
series on
No,
this.
no, 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 no. The point we're missing the point of the
I'm not missing the
email.
point. I know what you're saying. You're saying I was factually inaccurate and I leave ourselves
Okay,
open
so
to
if you
vulnerability.
wanna if you wanna have if you wanna have that kind of argument with someone who doesn't have your interests in mind, who with someone who is trying to destroy your credibility because you are actually telling the truth and have the facts when it comes to the con
I
and the
totally agree.
Ukrainian. And
I
that's all
love
I'm
that.
saying to you.
Yeah.
Why dive into
I'm not
that?
discounting anything you're saying, buddy. I'm not.
So because I can tell you this much, I can tell you this much. Instead of pushing back on me,
I'm not.
right? Oh, that is
I
it.
want us to
If you hit it,
express and learn from each other so that other people like honing in on this. Because again, let me just ask you this to close this up because we've got to continue this, okay? And then we'll make a
yeah.
decision downstream.
Okay.
But Kevin, the reason why I did what I did on Friday, that I think you're the only person is going to listen to the whole thing, but I'm incredibly honored. And let's say if I left it out there, unless you convince me otherwise to take it down, my thinking based on what we were expressing is there's so much confusion about so many topics that in the social media sphere, it's hard to keep up to where our attention should be, particularly when we're dealing with something so crucial as a potential next stage of whatever this last 23 years in the Middle East has been, right? Because it's going to take up a lot of the oxygen, especially, and the next topic is going to be Russia and Ukraine, and then maybe Taiwan and China, and then, the global economy and everything else. But meanwhile, what we're just trying to say between us with the Clean New Deal is that, listen, people, with all of these other things that are happening out there that we can debate about and literally get in the weeds on conspiracy versus fact, because the government, we don't know these answers. And it does get confusing. And it does get to the point where, if you've been around a long time, you can just be whiplashed into a situation where you're like this, which I think a lot of us are to some degree, right? And what I'm trying to do, and I know you're trying to do, and we've got to do it together, is that there's millions of Americans out there with different backgrounds, with different experiences, with different come froms, with different ideology and everything else. And where I'm coming from is that I want us all to have liberty and justice and equality and fairness based on all of those battles that have been won prior to our existence on this earth. And you and I are in the same age range. But here we are at 2024 with these things that you and I have identified that are crucial, the climate being one of them, which of course all of fossil fuel dovetails into this whole thing, which is part and parcel of what we're trying to create with the Clean New Deal, because we're like, look, if we could destroy the corruption that's destroying us, that is all piecemealed in this incredible hierarchy of power globally. But yet it does run through the United States because of our central bank status and the global reserve currency. If we can find a way to get everybody's attention and blinders on to what we're just revealing, to get millions of people motivated to join us in harmony, in unity, to use the last vestiges of our democracy through your plan. I've got to give you the credit. You're the guy who made all the sense to me when you said we need to get a presidential candidate, because I kept thinking in my head prior to this whole thing, you got to have a whole new party. You got to have a whole new, the way I used to describe it during Bernie's run was you got to have a consumer intellectual and what was the third part? Intellectual revolution. These are all revolutions. They don't have to be military revolutions. They don't have to be the reign of terror. They don't have to be, we go and cut off people's heads and, in the square. I mean, if the American people still have a little bit of freedom left, we could exercise our power to force the issue. But the only realistic way to do it is what you played out, that you got to have a presidential candidate that is going to put the issue of corruption that we reveal in front of everything else, such that we can get a control of this crazy corruption that has a hold of our government and Supreme Court and all the courts around the country and everything else, which is just a complete betrayal of what our country is and what you fought for. I want to say again, so people understand that you were a tank division in Gulf War One. You served your country, you believed in the American dream, and you still do. And you live the vestiges of what the lessons of Martin Luther King are, which are, look, man, he didn't make race the central tenet. He made the ideology of the framework of the Constitution and living true to what we put on paper. And I hate to put words in your mouth, but that's what inspires me. And so, if there's anything I can say is, listen, brother, I welcome any criticism. I don't want to debate you. I want to learn from you. And I think,
And I hear you, Patrick. All I'm saying is, just like in alignment with what you said, there is all this white noise out here. So then that's why we need to keep our eyes on the prize. My email to you was about all the issues that I itemized in that email have nothing to do with the Clean New Deal and the new untouchables or the con that has the $70 trillion key to unlock how we've been completely abused and robbed by wealthy elites in this country. And so that needs to be our focus, because I can tell you this much: as the lights come on, as we are getting millions of Americans to come together, right? The powers that be will be combing these conversations. And all I'm saying is, those issues, which are debatable, as you demonstrated in this conversation, right, are distractions. We don't want to be talking about that. What we want to be talking about is what's happening with the Libertarian Party this week, right? Notice how they are dangling their nomination to RFK. Notice how they have invited both Dr. West and RFK to their convention in California. What I'm trying to say here is the idea that we have talked about in our Clean New Deal proposal is that there is nothing legally stopping independent third parties from putting together a dream team, you know, and then leveraging their organizations and giving their ballot access to the dream team independent ticket, right? Literally, the libertarians can be teeing up an RFK Cornell West ticket. You know, if those, I mean, they invited both of them. They didn't do, they didn't wait. I won't, you know, disparage, you know, Jill Stein or whatever, but you know, these two people they've invited. So that's what I'm saying. That is the methodology. And I'm hoping the rationale is starting to sink in with the Greens, you know, who also invited Cornell West and Jill Stein gave huge speeches at a recent event this week. So the message is starting to seep into those parties that already have broad ballot access. That if they elevate who their nominee is, they can actually win. And so they're looking to who has the best name recognition, who represents the broadest, you know, span of the American public, and stuff like that, and start talking to them, notwithstanding the fact that there may be many things historically that their little narrow lanes disagree with. You know, the libertarians are not going to, they love certain aspects of RFK, but they don't love his foreign policy, right? You know, and on and on. You know, they're not going to necessarily love your Cornell West and reparations and so, you know, you see what I'm saying? But they'll bring them
Fascinating.
to
I
the
know. Incredible. Across the
right.
board, man. Yeah.
But see, this is the pragmatism we need to, because what we're at that point where we need to set aside the little things that we disagree about in favor of the most important things. How we have all been put under the boot, put under the boot by the wealthy elites in this country, and that we're at a point where if we don't make our move, we may not have a move to make soon. Right?
Amen. Amen. And listen, dude, again, inspiring as always, impactful, very important. I'm going to really digest this, and I'm going to send you the link, and we'll talk about how things, you know, proceed. But a lot to talk about. I like the idea, Kevin, of just us really hitting some of these issues, though, because I think a lot of people just get so lost in space that if they could understand, again, what we're doing here is we're taking all of these elements and we're going, no, 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 no. This is, it is, where is your focus? It is the wealthy elites. It is the betrayal. And when we call it the elites, I hate to use that term. They're not elites. They're just criminals. And who's they?
Well, they are criminals. Oh yeah. Oh, they're
It's the
creeps.
financial
They're
system that we
sociopaths.
will continue to reveal to you. And the financial system is the hierarchy of too big to fail banks, private equity, hedge funds, you know, private wealth management, and all of the influence of the lobbies and everything else that makes sure that you don't understand that the upside is to them the whole time. And there's a lot of schemes that make sure everybody else does not live in the country we think. And that's what we're revealing. And so I would love to get that in front of all of the candidates you just talked about, because we could talk about this forever. I do have to go, unfortunately. I'm going to send you this right now.
Yeah.
Kevin, I really appreciate your friendship. And, you know, it's a growing process.
Oh
That's
no, it is. Oh,
it's
believe me,
evolution.
this is family talk. That's what I'm saying. Whether you release this or not, you know, that's fine. You know, I just want you to know what we're doing together, what
Agreed.
you have inspired. Because again, I didn't have the information. I learned it from you. I mean, in
And
terms
I'm
of
learning from you every day. And I'm learning
what what
about,
what has happened in our lives in
yeah,
terms of the financial corruption, right? And so the takeaway I hope you take away from this is not, because clearly you have a lot of knowledge in these areas. It's not that you don't understand any of these things, you do, right? Is that people will use these things which do not relate to what we're trying to do, to sidetrack, to reframe, to use as a basis to dismiss you, right? We have to be Jerry Rice. what made Jerry
Or
Rice not
Travis
only.
Kelce in the moment, but
Oh no, no, no. Well,
amen,
see,
amen.
I know it's history to say Jerry Rice,
No, nobody
but
compares to Jerry Rice. Nobody
I
compares.
say Jerry Rice because his uniform was completely tucked in.
Yeah,
If you wanted to tackle Jerry Rice, you had to square up on him and get him in his body.
that's right.
You weren't ever going to dive and grab his collar. His collar,
That's
there was
right.
nothing, everything was tight, everything was lean, everything was tucked. There
That's
was
right.
nothing loose. Okay. We have to be that way in this
I
battle
appreciate
against
that.
the most powerful people in the
Yeah,
world
yeah.
because anything they can grab a hold on, believe me, brother, you had a conversation about such and you said such and stuff like that. And all of a sudden we are back in the penalty box, oh, they don't have any credibility over that nonsense. That is exactly what they're gonna do.
Right.
That's all I'm
You're
trying
trying
to
to
say.
minimize. I know I get it. I love the structure. I mean, that's the way you engineer productions. I mean, that's you got to be efficient, so I get it from a managerial perspective, but there's no buts. This is just really cool. Look, I got to split. We'll be
Yeah.
in touch soon. All right, I'm gonna hit stop recording and I'll send this to you right away. Thank you very much. I really
Okay.
appreciate you, man. All the best to everyone. Take care. Bye. I'm not gonna post this without your permission. We'll talk.
Yeah. Oh
All right.
no. Oh no. Oh no. No. Hey. Oh, did you stop it?
Yeah. Let me stop.